Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of the To Be Silent podcast. In today's episode, we discuss meditation practices, implements, and talismans as all being a focus for your mind. Within that context, we discuss a Taoist practice known as the travel meditation, as well as the cube of space, a form of sacred space from the Western esoteric tradition that uses the Hebrew letters as the building blocks of creation and manifestation. We discuss the shortcomings of the secret and the inherent challenges of any magical, mystical, or manifestation practice. Some of the techniques we discuss may seem a bit esoteric, as this conversation is not intended to teach step by step these practices. However, I think you'll still find these aspects of the conversation valuable. And if you want to learn more about these techniques in greater detail, there's plenty of free information on our website, as well as a full array of detailed techniques and guided meditations available to our members. For more information on the techniques we teach and to learn about our membership program, go to tobesilent.com. Enjoy the show. One of the things that I keep coming back to, which is a Bashar thing, but again, it's like if like Neville talks about like just the imaginative faculty and like and the way that he speaks about it, that's like his very pure like version with like no frills, no
Right.
anything,
Right.
right? Um, but if every technique is essentially like a permission slip in the sense that like it facilitates you getting into maybe a deeper state or whatever, then it's almost like then like the travel meditation is just a form of like going deeper into your subconscious and like removing layers of your physicality and like getting into a more pristine like internal environment that you can then have this more vivid and uh, efficacious creative experience, right? um
Right.
but but that doesn't mean that like there's like inherent power in the technique itself, like, right, that it's not like,
Right.
oh, that's going to do something more special than like the what I just was describing myself doing of like using the Hebrew letters to relax and then like being in that space and bringing up my end result and you know like so
Well,
yeah.
I mean, in the end, if you want to look at the very broad picture, right? Every technique is literally just, you know, every technique is a focus implement,
Right, right,
right?
like I was
And so
thinking
when
about
you
that
rarefy that, when you
when
pull it
because
together,
yeah when you were
it's just
saying
it's just uncovering what the Taoists would call the Tao, right? The way, the primordial mind, right? Like
right.
unfettered with, you know, humanity and justice that are artificial constructs from people. All of that stuff goes away. It doesn't, you're unfettered from that, right? It's like you're
Right.
released from those, you know, um, contrived constraints, right? And from
Yeah.
layering in the way that we've been taught and the way that we've lived in this world and all of those things, right? And our societies, our
Oh,
cultures,
uh, yeah, yeah. Keep going.
right? So,
Yep.
like when that stuff all goes away, you're left with the essence. You're trying to get back to like what was your mind like prior to you being here, you know? Like its purest state, right? Like where what you can envision in your mind is what's happening around you, you know. And Mark said something, simple and profound at the same time, which a lot of times that happens, right? It's like, why doesn't most people's stuff work is because they don't believe it, They don't, they can't sink into it as if it was something that was repeated so many times they just don't even think about it, right? It's there. It would be harder for them to think that that wasn't going to happen than it does. And so all of
Right.
these techniques bring us closer to that primordial mind, right? Where it's unfettered by all the other constraints that we've put on ourselves or our society or our culture or whatever, our world, our physicality has put on us, right? So
Right.
it's a
Right.
stripping away of all those things. And when you go through like the travel meditation with the different elements, it's like, yeah, we're working on that, but you know, in the end, working it's like when you go through those things in their purest form and their most intense form, it strips away all of the negative aspects of that element as well. So it's like you're building this pristine environment, which was where we came from before we were here. You're building this pure elemental structure that, it's like, yeah, you have activity, but there's no rage. You have this, but you have happiness without it, consuming you, and making you oblivious to everything else or being hedonistic or whatever it is, right? So um yeah, you just it's like true inspiration comes from the one, right? Or aspects of the one. And it's not, you're not clouding it with, I mean, inspiration is not you um imagining something, right? It's like you're making a clear environment so that those thoughts can come to you, right? They're not your thoughts. It's the thoughts of the one. So you sort of ask the one a question and then you clear your mind so that it can, you know, inspire you. It can breathe life into something, new for you, or a road to travel or something to try or whatever, that
Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
thing without you sort of mucking up the works by your desires or God knows what, right? Like, I mean, there's a place for that, right? I mean, obviously, desires and all what we want is obviously a big deal. But, when we're trying to be inspired, again, are we looking for new roads to travel or new ways to, maybe better ways to, get after something? Or are we just looking for confirmation of what we want? Confirmation of the way that we think it should be presented to us. That's not inspiration. You know, that inspiration is a very pure thing, but we have to have an environment that's conducive to opening up to that. And that means unfettered by the garbage of, whatever the negative aspects of fire would be for us, you know.
Right. Right.
So when we do the journey meditation over and over and over again, when we pass through those things and come back renewed, every time we pass through those elemental barriers, it's an elemental burning or cleansing of those territories and making the environment more ripe to, not be fettered by what we think that should be, or
Right.
what we have um, taken on from our society or our culture or whatever.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Yeah, I listened to this such a good Bashar quote this morning where this guy was coming up and asking him and about like he was studying to be a hypnotherapist. And so right before his like little session with him was done, Bashar goes, I will remind you one important thing about hypnosis. You are all always hypnotized. He goes, he said, so if you understand it's simply a matter of shifting what you are hypnotized about, you can move mountains. Literally move mountains.
right,
And I
right.
was like, and then it made me think about, and I watched it was such a good I mean, like a kind of tie into this. Kira and I watched that show Presumed Innocent,
Oh yeah,
the Jake
good, right?
Gyllenhaal one. Oh my God, it was really good.
It was good and intense.
And towards the end of it, I started to get this like we were both so gripped by it and so into it, right? and it I had this like moment where I had a new level of appreciation for like people when people gurus or whatever. I mean, sure, Sadhguru has said it a bunch of times too, but like the idea that like, and I think that that's what you mean when you say this is a dream, is that like, and people say, oh, this is a dream, it's transient, like it's like pulling in your kind of attention to make it feel so solid, so fixed, so real, so there's nothing else. Um, and I was like, oh, like the way that I'm relating to the show is also how I'm relating to my life. Like there's no distance there. I'm
Right.
completely sucked in by it instead of like being like
Right.
observational and kind of like, and I was like, that's what Brian means when he says like this is a dream. Like that's a part of, I think, a layer of what you mean when you say that. It's like,
Definitely.
yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, yeah. So
It's cool how
I
all
think
these
that's
little
that same
things.
quote, right? That's the
Oh, for
hypnosis quote.
sure.
You're like hypnotized by, it's like this is it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
like entrainment, right? I mean, it's like
Right.
this
Yeah.
is what
Yeah.
it is. And, somebody sees the To Be Silent site and they've been like asking to figure out what they want to do next or how they want to, they feel like they should be more spiritual or whatever that means, but they have no basis. They have no base of having anything before that, right? So, but it's like that's the pattern interrupt, right? It's like you're asking, 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 and then the one goes, "What about this? What about this? What about this?" You keep asking, "What about this?" What about, until
Right.
something the attention, is grabbed by something, and some people will just go, then their doubts get in and they muck it all up, right? Instead of just like look at it and go into it and see if that calls to you in some way. Most of us now are pretty, you know, um, I think most people, at least most thinking people are, pretty aware of, marketing and, like they skip over a lot of that stuff, the glitz and the whatever, the grand claims and, whatever. It's just they're looking for material that they can latch onto and utilize. And it's like if they can see through that and go to the heart of it and give it a try, and if it speaks to them, take the plunge and do it and see what happens, right? And then adjust from there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Um,
it's yeah, it's very important. I mean, I think that all of that stuff is like it's giving you a much more clear, again, the big picture clear.
yeah.
Like you're seeing the forest, like here's all the little individual things we can get so drilled in on that. It's like, we get tunnel vision,
Right.
but we lose the context of the huge picture that's there to be awed at, right? And
Yeah.
say, oh, okay, this is, that's a pine tree, but but in the Adirondack Park, I mean, that's 1 million square acres of pine trees and everything else. You're getting the much bigger picture of like the awe of how big it is and how, and connected and all of these things. It doesn't make the tree irrelevant,
I
but
don't
we
know what you're,
understand, well, it's
what are you making I don't get what you're making an analogy about.
like,
Or what are you
again,
trying to
like
say?
it's not about the techniques, right? Not always about the techniques. Like again, there's the convergent focus and divergent focus, right? The divergent focus is always keeping it in context and seeing how it's, you know, how we can focus on the bigger picture too as a very large picture and see like how vast and how like incredible it is and it has its own inherent beauty and all of those things, right? But it's hard for us to digest it in that big a swath other than looking and being in awe, right? But so the way that we approach it is by you know finding a trailhead, finding a
Right.
tree and getting in there, so we can, walk into the unknown on the edge and know that we're not in Kansas anymore. Coming
And by that
back.
you mean like a single technique or a technique, right? Not
Yeah, yeah.
two.
These
Yeah.
are all just entry points again, right?
I think it's like what you so um when we were talking about um, creating a sacred space around like my home or my property or whatever, and you were talking about like, oh, well, you just like, layer it in there and do like, you know, uh, maybe like a talisman, and then you put it in the wall or on the wall or on a stone and put it in in different directions and, those types of things. And I'm like, how do I how do I know that I'm actually doing anything when I'm doing that, right? Like that it's working. It's almost like uh and I had this, when I texted you the other night, the thing about the remembering to kind of touch on that more, that idea that like all
Yeah,
implements are focuses for your mind, was
sure.
that because I thought I was just starting to kind of uh, brainstorm kind of how I might do that and where I might place things and stuff like that. And then it hit me like, if they were physically there, there would be a piece of my mind that would know that they were there and what they represent. So it would be like every once in a while, there would be a tether of my energy going to that, thinking about that, knowing that that's there, understanding what it represents, and like being so it's not necessarily that like whatever I create and play and wherever I place it has like some inherent power. I mean, there's some there depending on what it is, but it's not as
Exactly.
but it's I would say if we're going on our theory or our understanding, it's
Yep.
it's more that it's going to be a physical anchor for a certain strand of like energy and intent, basically, right? and
Exactly.
and it'll kind of, that will become a different, layer
Yeah,
of,
because every time you even have a thought of that, even if it was
right.
a regular thought of it in the morning or during the day or whatever,
Yeah.
the only reason you could even possibly have that thought is if you made a connection energetically with that point.
Yeah.
And its connection with you is your field. So that energy that's it's accumulating or drawing to itself, a la talisman, right? Is is gonna that part of that is gonna imprint on your field as well and change your field, right? So my recommendation anytime somebody does that is just, nothing too extensive unless you want to do it that way, but you don't have to. Don't make it a chore, right?
Yeah.
Like just write down a baseline, like say, give yourself, five things for each element, and like what's the baseline for you right now before you do anything, what is the baseline, how is your success, how is your relationships, how is your health,
Mm-hmm.
how is your spirituality, what is that, and
Mm-hmm.
you know and at this point it's like, like once you see that, and you can even use those elemental characteristics to sort of look at it and say, like, this is the stuff I would rather increase, this is stuff I would decrease, and pick a, one that's going to be, recognizable to you, something that kind of occurs on a regular basis, especially things that you want to make stronger. And once you have that baseline, because you have to have, where are you in the picture right now? What's your location in the picture, right? You need to know that. Otherwise, every step you take will be haphazard, right? You could be walking completely away from the thing that you really want to get to. So if you don't know where you are, so you have to have that baseline. And even if it's just a short list, before you do anything like that, do that. And then just say, okay, I'd like to enhance this. Okay, make a really simple talisman that will enhance that. You don't have to get dramatic and find the aspect or do any. You could use a standard thing, knowing that, if you have that belief that that's going to be attracted to that and it's going to build it in that quadrant, right? And then every time you think about that, it's gonna pull something back to you, right? So and
And if you were,
enhance. And then after 30 days, 40 days, 60 days, you look at it, engage it and say, like, where am I now? Is it the same? Is it different? If it's different, is it better or is it
Mhm.
worse? And if it's better, great, keep going. If it's neutral and nothing's happening, change the damn talisman. Change the thing. It could maybe it a parchment talisman isn't good enough. Maybe you need something that's just um inherently has that charge, like a certain type of mineral or a certain type of crystal or a certain type of whatever, right? And then when you have that, put that back there and see if that changes it in some way. Like it's a step-by-step process until you make it better and better and better to the level that you want it to be, right? So, um, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty systematic way of going about it, but it's a way of like gauging, how much you have to do. And um, you really want to know that there's going to be some difference there. And then every time you feel difference there, you can always link it back and say, well, that's because of this, and how it's being imprinted on me on a regular basis. I mean, at its most basic, you could literally take a hexagram of, you know, a hexagram related to that ultimate idea that you're trying to achieve and put it in if it's south oriented, put it in the south. If it's, whatever, you go through the quadrants, right? And I mean, hexagrams in the weirdest, it's kind of funny. I didn't come up with this, but it does make some sense. It's like a barcode, you know, and it's why we use them over doorways and things like that, right? Or over your headboard, in your bed, because it impacts your field. It's like you're being scanned constantly, and that influence, that energy, and again, because it's so, um, it's had thousands of years of use from billions of people, that it's like, you know,
Yeah.
it's going to accumulate a certain amount of, there's a
Right.
certain um uh energy that's accumulated from that lineage of people that have all used it exactly the same way for the most part. So you're sort of putting
Right.
stuff in place. That's,
It's interesting.
that's a simple way to do it and really interesting way to do it without getting too complex into the Western stuff.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, which is exactly what I was about to say. But
Yeah.
well, I was just gonna say I did I took the I had this uh idea to make a like a two-dimensional representation of the cube of space.
Yep.
So I could like draw it on a piece of paper, like as a
Yep.
flat thing, right?
Yep.
And that's the natural shape that it took was a hexagram,
Yep.
you know.
Yep.
Um
Makes sense.
yeah, and it even there was even I'll send a picture of it to you too, because you can even do it in such a way that like uh even the 12 single letters can be appropriately arranged according to how they would be on the cube of space, but
On the edges.
following the
Right.
lines that would
Right.
connect each one of the double letters properly. So I know it's
Cool.
like,
Yeah. It's good.
if we use this for a podcast, I'm sure that would be like totally obscure, but
Yeah,
but I
but
just wanted to mention it to
then
you
we
because I
then we
because
then
it's
we put
cool.
up some, PDFs of your, of the drawing or whatever, so people can
Right, right,
follow
right.
along, right? So,
Yeah, true,
um,
true.
but that's, yeah, I
But I
mean,
just thought it was cool because it was like I wanted a way to like use that almost to be able to like do a simple talisman on the fly, instead of something that could just be, whatever, something comes to mind or something's going on and it's like, oh,
yep.
well, I think that you even talked about doing that sort of thing with, I remember one time in class you said that you had a chalkboard and a piece of chalk, and somebody called you and they were like distressed and you wanted to help them just kind of smooth out their experience that they were having. And I remember you said all you did was, I don't know if there was more to it than this, but you just made the lunar crescent symbol on the chalkboard, and used it as a focus, right? To direct the intent toward them of that kind of settling, smoothing, of the emotional aspect of their
Right. Right.
experience at that moment. And I thought, wow, that's so simple, like how great is that? I want to be able to like, incorporate the things that we utilize, like the sacred space stuff, but
Yeah. Yeah.
to be able to do it on, do it on the fly more, and anchor it to these things that at least, like, yeah, at least for me anyway, feel so like significant and relevant, right? Like, and that's the whole thing, right? About like, it's like, okay, if you're working with something like the Hebrew letters, they have this inherent power, let's say,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they are entities and energies and have a certain type of like influence and character, and they're like the, as letters and sounds, the formative um frequencies or energies of creation in a way, right? um but then it's even that is then compounded by my understanding and belief in them as that. So it's like I think, but I do think that that's like an interesting kind of like, how do you think about the relationship between, like, is there like percentages in your mind or something like that between like how much is it that the technique that I'm working with, the talisman that I'm working with, or specifically something like the Hebrew letters or entities or energies that you're working with, how much is it that they're lending this power or influence to what you're doing, and how much is it your intent and understanding and belief that's kind of doing the, whatever, the causing the effect? What's the balance there? How do you like understand that relationship?
I, I think that's why we put, in general, why we put so much emphasis on, know thyself, right? Because you need to be able to untangle your own desires and your own wants from, you know, energies that are completely balanced, being shunted through you, especially through you if you're, working for somebody else or working on somebody else, right? Because you don't want your stuff to get in there. You want that that balanced aspect to come through you as a clear conduit to, sort of get into that place, get into that person or that event or whatever it is, right? So, I mean, and again, I generally I use the cube because it satisfies both of those things for me. It's like in my mind, it's very
You mean the cube of space?
yeah, it's like a very almost a mechanistic, as close as it can be to that process, right? It's like I put it around me, but I have my inherent understanding and what I've come to realize over time. But it's like when I tap on, you know, the the letters, as entities to do something like that, it's sort of like I know, like the essence of Tav is that specific thing within the perfect context. So it's not just a perfect thing, it's the perfect thing fitted into the perfect context. So it can hold that, right? And that might be way, not might be, is way, way more intricate than I can figure out. Like percentage here, percentage there, this much of this much of that. So it's like but in utilizing, the letters
Oh,
as entities, it's like
oh, I
they're
see.
in perfect balance. So Tav is this, you can have all these things flooding in, and because Tav is so solid in the thing that you're trying to
which
do or what it is,
represents the end result,
the end
right?
result,
And it's at the
complete
center, and
in
it's at the
context with everything else, not outside of the context, but in the context, right? It's
right.
like, you know, that its job is to sort out and, like say, oh, I'm going to take 5% from you, and I'm going to take 2.5% from you, and I'm going to take 3% from this
Yeah, yeah.
entity, and this, like all of these things coming in, and it's sorting and saying like it's only going to fill up what I need. In a way, I mean, for me, there's a lot of aspects that mimic, like, for me, like, certain understanding of the way certain supplements or herbs work, right? Like there are certain herbs like black cohosh will um, it will fill open estrogen receptors, but it won't compete with estrogen. So, and it isn't estrogen. So, but it has the shape of that so that that will fit into that receptor, and the body responds as a cascade effect by producing, feeling as if you have enough estrogen. All those cascades that need estrogen will go through to the end in a good way, right? So, but it's a misnomer in Western medical minds that, they think that if you give people black cohosh, then it produces more estrogen. But that's not the case. There's no plant that produces animal hormones at this point, hopefully, and nothing, as an heirloom product. There's nothing out there that we know of at this point that produces animal hormones. So if there is now or ever will be, it's because of genetic manipulation that scientists do. So it's kind of like putting fish genes in tomatoes or whatever, that kind of thing to
What about,
increase.
didn't you say pine produces like testosterone?
Yeah, but pine produces the precursors that bind with those receptors that then has it producing more testosterone.
I see.
So all the precursors,
I
but
see.
it's not like pine pollen is equal to testosterone.
Right, 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 right. Testosterone's
It's
not in it.
no,
It gives you the building blocks of it.
that's right. That's right. And the
So
body
your
can
point,
take those and manipulate it and make it into more testosterone.
so your point about the black cohosh analogy was just that like dealing with these more balanced and perfected aspects of the one aspects of creation is a way of like um, introducing and incorporating these perfect balanced energies in the creative process of whatever you're doing and having them lend their influence to the, so that what whatever it is that you're creating or whatever it is that you're doing or manifesting or whatever fits into a more balanced context, into a more balanced whole within the context of your life, and then beyond that as well. So,
Right. How
um,
it settles. The context is so important, right? Because it's like, I want $1 million. Well, you get $1 million, but then somebody takes it away from you.
right, 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 right,
No,
right,
you want $1 million in a context that says you can actually utilize it,
right.
right? So,
Yeah,
and that it doesn't make your life go out of proportion in other crazy, stupid ways, right?
right. And because you know that you your conscious mind is not capable of managing all those variables or understanding them or even taking them in truly, then it's like you're not just you're not just like yeah. You're yeah, you're not, it's not like you're like, I mean, do you think of it as almost like handing it off to,
I
or
mean,
just like,
it's just understanding that. I'm trying to think of a better physical analogy. It's knowing that perfect aspect, it's like one of the best parts about them is that the context for them, it's like an environment, like your environment can hold that thing that you want in a way that will let you utilize it rather than it just being a flash in the pan, or like, you haven't really put a lot of thought into it or whatever, no matter how great it is that whatever, how big it is, it doesn't matter, right? um and that, they will, by their ultimate balance, they would only be able to produce it in a scenario where it could be contained, it could be held in that place. It's like that's almost inherent in that sacred space idea as well, right? It's like it's
Right.
concentrated, and it's protecting from the outside interference, as well as consolidating and making a pure environment for that person to transition, change, whatever, right? Into whatever it is that they desire, and leave the other stuff behind, because the other stuff, it it can only, like a fish doesn't live in the desert, right? It needs an environment that's conducive. It doesn't mean you couldn't take a live fish from a bucket of water and throw it in the desert, and it's going to flop around for a while, and it's kind of alive, but it's not going to be very short. It's going to be very short-lived, right? It's going to die eventually, right? It needs an environment that's conducive to it to thrive. And that's a lot of the stuff we don't, you know, we would have to have perfect far sight to understand what it would be, to what we would need to do to make that environment where, enlisting the help of these entities that are, perfection of what they are, right? There's no imbalance there. It's a very narrow, like, everything they do is within their scope, and it's perfect. It's balanced for that. And that's it. So for them to be able to help produce a want, they can only do it within the environment that's conducive to maintaining that. It doesn't mean you can't fuck it up still if you get your $1,000,000 and screw around or do whatever and lose it. But it means that hopefully you'll have the wherewithal to, have figured out a lot of that stuff, or not make too many big mistakes, so that things will unfold in a much more, in the way that you would desire it to be, without having to detail out every little aspect of that.
Mhm.
That's kind of like, when we used to do destiny retrieval in Four Winds, right? It was like, I always said to people, this is basically fruitless, because how many people can think about all of those things? You might be able to focus on a single thing, but what about the context? How are you going to layer all that in? How could you possibly, with your human mind, you know, be able to sort of envision all the little ins and outs that will be the perfect container, the perfect environment for this thing to thrive that you
So then
desire?
what so then how do you, like, bringing it back to Neville Goddard
Yeah.
and his kind of pure simple technique of just basically going into the silence or a relaxed state and imagining the wish fulfilled and immersing yourself in that feeling and embodying that feeling and believing it in, as he would say. How do uh, you think that doing these techniques with something like the cube of space or working with other energies or whatever, um, do you think that you're overcomplicating it unnecessarily?
I mean, I guess it depends on the person, right? I
Yeah.
mean, some people will make Neville work really great. For other people, they'll have more questions, and that'll cause it to not work as great, right?
Mm.
It's like, and if Neville was here and I could question him, I would absolutely question him about, like, you know, how do you get into that open space, and what does that exactly do when you get into that, completely relaxed state, that neutral place? And,
Did you
what
train
about
yourself to do that?
context, and what about all of this? And, like, is there
Uh,
a way to sort of tease it out? I mean, but again, that's my personality, right? I like the
right.
little intricacies, and,
Sure,
and
sure.
to see, not from a mechanistic standpoint, but just to understand, like, okay, I mean, I've used the Neville thing before and it works fine. It's like, and I didn't find that it was any less or more difficult than anything else. It's just a different way of doing it. I
Mhm.
mean, you're still a pretty complex array of these different frequencies. You're a complex array, fingerprint basically of energy, right? So, you know, putting yourself into neutral so that then they can all, um, you know, the idea is that if you can be in neutral first, because everything has to go through neutral. If you can be in neutral and then
Which is a state of profound relaxation or
correct,
very deep relaxation, as close
right,
to being a consciousness without a body as possible
right,
in your,
exactly.
yeah.
And so from that state, just holding the end result in whatever way that you can, layer in the five senses or five elements, that type of thing. Um, then you're basically doing the same thing. It's just, for me, for me, the ability to understand the cube and to use the cube makes a little more sense to me. Um, but it's not that I don't think the Neville stuff will work. I just think it's not, it's dangerously, well, no, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that it's, people reading it now will think that it's dangerously close to The Secret or something, where you don't have to do anything. You just think it and you're done. It's, if you think it's strong enough and long enough, it'll happen. And it's like, you know, there's a lot of nuance that isn't explained there, that will either
Like
keep
what?
you on track or make it so frustrating that you just think it's all bullshit, and you walk away from it.
And what are the distinctions there between those things? Like between like you're saying there's the nuances there between like just think about it and it will happen versus like Neville. And because Neville, I mean, a lot of the things that Neville would say is like he gives many examples where he would say, people are imagining the thing that they want or whatever, and doing it, let's say even like on a regular basis. Typically, I mean, I just watched this clip of one of Neville's students talking about how um Neville instructed him, he's like, to do this exercise where he like imagined um climbing a ladder or whatever, and he said he did it every night before he fell asleep for 3 months. And then like his mom called him over to the house, and his dad was like up on the roof working on something, and she asked him to like bring him something that was like, can you bring this to your father or whatever? And so he's like gets on the ladder and he's like, oh shit. Like
Yeah,
like
right.
basically it's like, yes, you imagined this event, and it wasn't like you didn't say, oh, I'm just going to go put a ladder up in my backyard and work on something and be like, oh my God, I'm doing the thing. It's like something outside of you initiated this event to occur because you put so much energy into, you know,
Right.
creating it internally. Right.
Right, right. But then
So,
you still have to do, like, what if the guy just said, like, oh, I don't have time, I'm gonna go wherever. Would
right,
would there
right.
be another event with a ladder outside of himself to do, until he finally took action on it, right? And that's the thing. The secret is more like, just think about it and it'll happen. You don't have to take any action. You don't have to do anything around it. You don't have to, it's like, no, you do.
Oh, right. I see. So they say, and I feel like, and in the I don't remember it that clearly, but do they not talk about like doing I mean, they don't really talk about like relaxation or
No.
developing the imaginative faculties or like
Well,
um,
I mean, a little bit
or
there. It's sort of implied. You have to
or like
imagine that it's going to
or
be.
like or consistent practice
No,
or like like any of those things. I mean, I feel
not
like
that I recall. I mean, it's
because I feel like that
been
like
years.
yeah, right. Right, neither have I mean, I don't remember either, um but I feel like that's where people like Joe Dispenza or whatever kind of fill the gap because even in
Yes,
his like personal story, he talks about like doing it over and over and over and over and over and over again until then, it occurred. And I just I feel like it's almost like the principle is correct, right, of the secret. It's
right.
just that
The
the
application.
applic the application is like divorced from the uh as above so below type principles where
Correct.
it's like because one of the things I was talking about last night was like that whole idea of like, oh, well, for most of us, we want to, okay, our mind is really powerful and what we focus on can become the thing that occurs for us. But most of the time we're just flipping between like this thing, bing, 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 right? And it's like, oh, you want to have a mind that can focus on something and build something up within yourself and create it and make it stronger and more vivid and more real so that you're investing your energy to the point where it becomes more much to feel more real to you. And, it's like, well, why is that different than going to the gym 3 times a week or whatever,
It
and
isn't.
we were talking about like, oh, like missing it. Oh, what if I miss a week of like working out? I feel like I'm behind and my body feels tired or, like weak or whatever. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why is our, why do we think that our mind is
Is any
any
different.
different?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. It has
Yeah.
to be exercised. It has to be, disciplined. It has to be, you want to be able to focus on something for more than an instant. I mean, because look at how much on the other side that you were talking about, it doesn't take any training to do that. And that's why it holds us in this place of being confused, right? Like
Oh,
the
yeah.
millions of thoughts every day. We make little comments about it. We have memes about it, monkey mind and this. Every tradition has a word for it, right?
Yeah.
Taoist is confusion, it's like, you know, and distraction and all of these things, right? It's like, but that's just not being able to like so, put yourself in a place that's gonna, sort of insulate you from that to some
Right.
degree.
Hence
Learn
the
how
sacred
your
space.
mind will insulate yourself from that, right? And
Right.
how you can then hold, and then on the other side, how you can hold the focus of a very specific thing without interruption for an extended period of time, right? And then how, that extended period of time becomes layering in the elements of it to such a refined degree that you really only need to focus on it for a second, so that but it's pristine. It's like you're literally walking into a lucid dream where it's as real as your physical reality.
Right.
And, to be able to put yourself in that place. I mean, there are a few stories with Neville about that, where it's like, especially when he was doing it. And I don't think everybody, when they listen to him, like get that to the degree, and he didn't emphasize it, but where he was, I just remember one where he was sitting in a chair in a room and he was thinking about, this person and or some situation, but then he was like instantly standing on the deck of a ship and, and with that person and doing all these things, right? And it's like, but it wasn't, if people didn't know, they would just say, oh, he's just imagining that in his chair. And it's like, yeah, but literally he felt as if he was there doing it, you know, being in that, even to the point where it was like superimposed over the reality of the room to begin with. And then he just sort of moved into it. Well, that's pretty much a visionary state or a lucid dream.
Right.
So, to that
Right.
level, to that
And
degree, where you're standing on the deck of a ship and you feel the breeze on your skin and the goosebumps that are coming up and your hair kind of flying back a little bit, or and you're speaking to somebody and you hear their voice and you can see them as if you're talking to them, not even on a screen, but in real life. That's the level of, you know, be there now, that it has to be. And so that unless you trip into it, which, I think is, has, pluses or minuses. I mean, it's a one-off, right? But then you're going to suffer the rest of your life trying to figure out how to replicate that if you don't have proper training. We take the longer path, proper training first, and then you're constantly, judging it by those events and making it stronger and stronger until you can do that, right?
Right, right, right.
So,
Yeah, it's like there was this great Sadhguru clip where he was talking about how about that, about developing the, your imaginative faculty and focusing your mind and stuff. And he was saying uh he was talking about how he started practicing that, like not really even knowing what he was doing or whatever when he was like just a little kid. And he said, and you could tell it was interesting because you could tell by the expression on his face and the way that he said it, he was saying like that he spent hours and hours and hours and hours like getting his mind to be able to visualize things. And you could tell that like he meant like just hours, like
right,
and it was like
right.
and he was saying to the group that he was speaking to, and he's like, and I don't know how, what that's what it's worth to you, like what's your he said he's like, what's your life worth? Like
Yeah. What's your pain threshold?
what, yeah, 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 but just that idea of like yeah, it's but almost implying like it's your life, or that your life is a consequence of how well you develop your capacity to use your mind the way that you want.
Right.
Um, and yeah, and I feel like that's the kind of stuff that, y- you're always like, and other people too are like, make fun of The Secret for, because none of that is,
No,
it's just kind of
it's
like you
so
said.
simple.
Yeah, right, 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 right. Yeah.
Well, that's why, even within the 5 year span of that movie coming out, you know, everybody and their brother was like a secret life coach, kind of deal,
Yeah.
and then they all faded away very quickly because you can only get so far with that
Right, right,
before
right.
people start asking questions that you have no idea because you've never done it.
You have no
You have
experience.
no experience with it,
Right, right.
So it's like that was one of those fads that I was very happy went away very quickly
Yeah.
because it just generates confusion and more, more
False hope.
false hope, but also then, false hope becomes, disillusionment, and that
Right.
disillusionment becomes,
Pessimism.
radicalized or whatever, and it becomes anger at those people that talk about it or even
Right.
suggest that anything around that could be,
Is right.
is something that could be done, and they get really pissed off,
Yeah.
and so,
And
we
then
don't need to bring all that onto ourselves. It's like it's hard enough already. Look, we're a life raft in the middle of a fucking black hole of despair, and so a life raft in a black hole of anxiety, it's like Jesus Christ, it's like, do we need more pressure pulled down on ourselves for that? It's like, no, it's not bad enough. Make it worse for me. Thank you.
right, 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 right,
Right?
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, right? I feel like, yeah, that's the thing. You have to be so solid in yourself and like your experience that those those types of whatever criticisms or whatever don't really phase you, because it doesn't, because once something's in your experience, then like you always say, no one can take that away from you. It doesn't matter what other people think. It's like,
No. I mean,
yeah,
it's one thing to explain, for a physicist that's really well versed in what they do, it's one thing to explain a general concept to somebody, but if somebody wants to know more specifics, they'll ask you, you know, do you know about this or this, this proof or that, mathematical equation or this or that or this concept or that. And when you say no, and they're like, well, I don't know how to explain it to you then, because it takes all these things to be able to do that. And they get pissed at them. That's the same thing, right? It's like, but why would you be pissed at somebody for you not being smart enough or educated enough to understand the basics so that they can explain the more intricacies, the more intricate aspects of a concept?
Right.
It's just
Right.
it's very, it's the same thing. It's just that with that, people go, oh yeah, well, he's a physicist. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's like it doesn't get more eggheady than that.
Yeah, man, you don't get the same kind of clout off the bat.
Yeah, I right. I mean, it's not the same thing. It might be the same thing if I was like floating a foot off the ground and they were asking me, "How the fuck are
Right.
you doing that?" I was like, "Well, it's just in my mind." And it's like,
Right.
"But it's specifically, what are you doing?" And it's like,
Right.
"Well, do you know this? Do you know this? Do you know burning meditation? Do you know that?" And it's like, "No, no. Then I have no platform to tell you how to do it."
Right.
Just think about it. It'll happen. And it's like, fuck you. Get the sticks and torches and pitchforks, and we're roasting Brian tonight in the front yard. He's
Right.
a
Right.
witch, burn him.
It'll work if you believe it'll work. But how do
Right,
I get to
right.
that state of belief?
Instead of going, woe is me, I'll put my nose to the grindstone and learn this shit. It's more
Right.
like kill the guy that can do it because I don't want to be compared to him. He makes me feel bad.
Right.
His very existence is violence against me, you know.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah, right.
I would just go back. Like, you don't have the right social construct, okay?
Right, 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 right. Yep. Hey everyone. I wanted to briefly interrupt today's episode to let you know that right now we are offering a 30-day free trial of the To Be Silent membership. That means you can join our program, come on 2 of our live calls that we hold every other week with our members, and find out if it's right for you. If you're enjoying this conversation, I think that you'll love being a part of our live calls. So give it a try. Go to tobesilent.com to start your free trial. And now on with the show.
Here's the reality of it. It's like, you want to
Right.
do this shit, you got to have your shit together. You got to be willing to take a few lumps too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like airy fairy, everything's great, and nothing will impact you in a negative way. You stir the pot, man. If your pot's been brewing for 40 years and this is the first time you've stirred it, there's going to be a lot of fucking sediment at the bottom. And a lot of that's going to be dross that comes up to the top. You're going to have to skim that shit off before you can actually eat that. So, you know,
Yeah.
that's what it is. I mean, that's just the long and the short of it, right? I mean, we have
Yeah.
we have a society
That's
now
the
where
other thing, right?
where
Like that's the
so many people are disconnected from any spirituality, like no church, no temple, no mosque,
right.
nothing. And then you're going to tell them, oh, well, pick a spiritual practice that's good for you or whatever. But that doesn't mean it's harmless. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in a mental way, that could produce physical results too, in a not the most friendly way, right? Like, it's going to bring shit up to you. How
And
could it not?
that's the other thing, right? That's the other aspect of the secret that nobody talks about is that idea
Right.
of stirring, like you saying, stirring the pot. It's like they just they it's definitely, and that's the general vibe of manifestation programs and stuff, like even reading their sales pages. Like I don't think we ever published the podcast where I was literally reading the sales page of one of those people that's like effortless manifestation, effortless this, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, you don't fucking understand. Either you don't understand or you're willfully lying to people. You either
Correct.
don't understand, haven't done it yourself, or like I just don't get how people's perspective on those things can get so out of touch with at least my experience and the reality of it. Like really bothers me because it's like, because that's exactly what you're saying. You haven't done this stuff for, whatever, however much time. Then you start like stirring the pot by saying like, using these techniques, doing these things, they're going to drive you deeper inside yourself and deeper into like whatever is in there and however you're configured and whatever is going on. It's like you don't think going deeper inside yourself will like like bring up anything that is you know
Well,
whatever.
I
It's like
think that, to be honest, I mean, I think you actually, you know, put in the most concise way the the biggest problem with any manifestation is that people have this idea, and everybody has it in the beginning until they're told this, but that you cannot get that want, you can't be the same person and have the thing that you don't have right now.
right.
You That can't happen. That is energetically why
Yeah.
people, 95% of people that win the lottery are in jail or broke in 5 years.
And I would say that it's 95% of the reason why, or it's the reason for 95% of the people why they're drawn to this work. Because, and that's exactly, I was literally like just thinking out loud a little bit about that for myself, like recognizing that within myself, recognizing and like acknowledging, like, I got into this work initially because I wanted to get the things that I wanted without having to do the things that made me uncomfortable.
Can you put a big red X on the screen that
Yeah.
flashes?
Fail. You know?
That's right. That's right.
Uh,
Oh God. But that's the thing. And
which
so
and
if you
by uncomfortable, I mean like you said, that's equivalent to doing something that's outside your comfort zone, which is equivalent to being a different person in terms of your action or in terms of the behavior that you express. So
Yeah,
it's like,
and it's just as ridiculous to think that as to, to buy a program that says we'll make you look like Arnold and you'll never be sore.
right.
Just follow these exercises.
Right.
It's like, and
Yeah.
you'll never have a muscle ache. You'll never be sore. It's like you'll never fail. It's like, what? I mean, nobody balks at that because it's physical, right? But it's the same fucking thing. You don't get it. You don't get to be who you are at this moment and walk into something completely incredible that you don't have.
Right.
It isn't possible. Or it will be a flash in the pan and you'll be worse off at the end. Can you imagine these fuckers that win $100 million and are broke in 5 years or in jail?
Yeah.
Do you understand the mental duress? Like I would do a subsequent one and say how many of these people are still alive, and out of the ones that aren't alive, how many of them actually took their own lives
Hmm.
from or are living on the street because they're so fucking depressed and whatever. They had it, what they considered they had it all, and they blew it. That's a very difficult thing to deal with. Very, very mentally difficult to deal with. So, you know, um, I mean, you have to become the person that and build your environment to the point where it can support that thing that you're trying to achieve or that you want, right? You're trying to gain. You have to have that, or else it's not going to work. So that's just part of it, right?